In this episode, we're going to be hearing about strange and terrifying things from park rangers and campers alike. Before we get into today's episode, be sure to go ahead and smack that subscribe button for stories just like these. Let's go. I wanted to share with you my experience as a park ranger. I was working in the Midwest. I don't want to reveal the location of the park just to try and protect my identity, but I've had some experiences happen out here that I just can't explain. One night, there was a woman who had come out to the park and she had wanted to tell me about her, and she had wanted me to tell her about some of these sightings that have happened in the area. I told her about a couple of them, and then she told me, well, I had one happen to me. Would you like to hear about it? So I told her, sure, what happened? She began to inform me. She was driving near one of the national parks down the road here, and it was right around 3 in the morning. It was a very dark stretch of highway, and she came around a curve. There appeared to be a man standing there in the middle of the road. She could not tell what he was, if he was a man or not, just because of how fast she was coming around, but she couldn't stop. But she didn't hit him. She was fortunately able to swerve around him, but very closely. Now, when she did this, she turned her head and noticed that he, too, turned his head toward her, but did not adjust his body. As he turned toward her, she could see his face, and she describes it as the ugliest thing she has ever seen in her life, a face that you would never forget. She described that it was evident he was not human. That's when she realized that the coat this man was apparently wearing was not a coat at all, but a large mass of fur and hair. This was not a man standing in the road. This appeared to be a large wolf, one that was upright at that. She could hardly believe her eyes. She said it looked like its face had been scarred at one point or another, and its expression appeared angry. I had another series of events where at night during a patrol, I had heard strange growling and howling in the distance, thinking it was maybe a wolf or a coyote, but after listening closer, I realized the howls were coming from different directions. I would hear one howl off in the distance, then another would respond from a different direction, a call and response. They were clearly communicating with one another. This went on for about an hour, hour and a half, and then stopped suddenly. I never heard those kinds of howls again, and I know what coyotes sound like, but this sounded like a coyote the size of a moose. I did find some strange, unidentifiable footprints the next day that were some of the largest canine tracks I'd ever come across. And those howls, they were anything but normal. They sounded more human-like than anything else I've come across. I'm not really sure what to make of it. There's definitely something strange going on in this park. I don't necessarily believe in the concept of werewolves, but I simply can't explain what that woman told me and what I've seen and heard myself. There's definitely something strange going on in this park. I just don't know what it is. I've heard other stories of people seeing things they cannot explain, things that defy logic and reason. I've seen things myself that I can't explain. I can't help but wonder if there's something more to these stories than meets the eye. Could there be something lurking in the woods that we don't know about? Something that's not supposed to be there. While I've had some crazy things happen, my colleague actually believes he had an encounter with what could possibly be a werewolf or some sort of bipedal canine. His experience was similar to the other unnamed woman's. It was early, around 4 in the morning, and my colleague was on patrol. He was driving down a road in the park when one of these things actually jumped out at his vehicle. He described it as huge, easily twice the size of a normal wolf. It had a coat of fur that was matted, jet black and thick, and it looked at him with eyes that were a deep, dark yellow. He describes it as the most terrifying thing he's ever seen in his life. He didn't know what to do. He hits the gas and gets out of there as fast as he could. Now, my colleague said the creature actually chased his vehicle for a short distance, trying to break into it as it went. But thankfully, it was unsuccessful, and he was able to escape. He said it was easily the most horrific experience he's ever gone through. While I try not to entertain the idea of a werewolf, whether or not they actually exist is apparently up for debate. Another gentleman who used to be one of my superiors had a very strange encounter while getting called out to inspect a small brush fire. When he got to the location in question, there did not appear to be any active fires, but a thin veil of smoke engulfing the surrounding area that smelt more like burning flesh than it did charred wood. This immediately raised red flags, and a search was sent out, but nothing was ever found. We have heard stories from other people who have seen and experienced very similar things. We just haven't been able to find any solid evidence. We're also not allowed to openly discuss such matters. It could damage our reputation and the parks. I'll share more stories with you when I can. Thank you for being this outlet for us. Story 2. I've worked as a ranger at one of the most popular national parks in the country for well over 10 years now. In that time, I've heard all sorts of stories from campers and other park employees about encounters with the Fortean and supernatural. I am an atheist, a skeptic, and I try my hardest to be a rational human being. I am also Latino, and am very familiar with the culture and beliefs of my people and others. That said, I believe the stories I've heard and experienced are true. I've also witnessed the Fortean and supernatural firsthand. I've had multiple encounters with skinwalkers and have heard their screams. I felt the presence of spirits in certain areas of the national park. I've also had strange and unexplainable incidents years ago that still haunt me to this very day. Anyway, I was working a night shift in a large campground during the holiday season. This campground is one of the most popular in the park, but it was off-season, so it was only me and 2 other rangers working. One ranger was working the day shift, which is 12 to 8 p.m. I was working the night, which is 8 to 8 a.m. The other ranger who was working a split shift from 8 to 5 p.m. and 5 to 8 a.m. He was working my day shift. We were all stationed at the main entrance, which is more of a large parking lot. The lot is long, narrow, and curved. There are multiple campsites spread out across the forest, but they are all in view and within range of the main entrance. The first strange thing I noticed was just how quiet it was. It was off-season, so the campground wasn't full, but it was still quiet. There wasn't much activity at all, which is very unusual for this campground during the day. I worked the main entrance while the other ranger worked on one of the loops. He was only a few hundred yards away. We could easily contact one another if need be. The day ranger ended up leaving and was waving goodbye as he went out the main entrance. I waved back and went about my business, checking campers in and out. About an hour later, I heard what sounded like a person screaming from the other entrance, which was only about a half-mile away from my current location. The scream sounded very distant and faint, but still loud enough to hear from a distance. Just as I realized what it was, it stopped. The silence that followed made the scream even more startling. The forest had gone completely silent aside from all the normal wood noises. Then, about 3 minutes later, it happened again. This time it was much closer. The scream sounded like a woman being murdered, loud and high-pitched. It was so loud, in fact, that the dogs in nearby campsites began barking and howling. I began shining my light in the direction of where I thought it came from, fearful it might be a mountain lion, but all I saw was another ranger waving his light back at me, shouting something. I could hear the screams in sets of 3 to 5, punctuated by long periods of silence. The screams sounded as if they were coming from every direction, but they would never stop for long. It was relentless and terrifying. I have no idea what was happening, but the other ranger did. He yelled at me that it was an entity, and we needed to get inside the office and lock it. His Spanish was very thick, and he was shouting so loudly that I could barely understand him. We ran inside the office, locking all the doors. I was just about to ask what was going on when we hear a loud crash against one of the windows. We could see something moving. I heard it outside. It sounded like a bear. The other ranger yelled for me to grab one of the rifles. I did, and we stood there, looking for whatever was out there. As we stood, we could hear the screaming continuing. It was so loud that I could feel the vibration throughout my entire body. The other ranger kept pointing to one of the shrubbery nearby, indicating that whatever it was probably going to come out of there. Then we heard it. Sure enough, seconds later, this thing starts crawling out from the road towards the shrubbery. It was covered in fur, except for its hands and feet. I could see that it had long, clawed nails. Just as I noticed this, it stood up erect on two legs. It was tall and gangly, but still had a somewhat human shape. It had long arms that dangled low, almost touching the ground. It was hunched over, with a large head swaying back and forth as it walked. I had my rifle pointed right at its head when the other ranger grabbed me and told me to stop. He informed me it was a skinwalker and that we should not kill it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but the other ranger informed me not to kill it. As he said this thing was pressing its face right up against the window and looked right into my eyes. It was so close, I could practically feel its breath on my face, and the odor was actually coming through the window. I got a putrid smell, like rotting flesh and sulfur. The stench was so strong, I had to cover my face with the collar of my own shirt. What I was looking at was no ape, like I thought. It looked more like a cross between a man and a coyote, but severely malformed and demented. The other man began praying and crying loudly, when this thing instantly shoots its attention towards him, as if very offended by his prayers. It snarled its jagged yellow teeth out of anger and then disappeared from the window. Within seconds, you could hear it screaming as it was moving away from us. The screams quickly faded into the distance, just as they had before. It was a few minutes before we came out. The other ranger was still crying, and I helped him collect his bearings. He explained to me that this was a skinwalker, an evil spirit from their culture. He said that this was one of the most dangerous and aggressive types of shapeshifters. The other ranger said it was trying to get into the campground and cause trouble, looking for human lives. He also said that it was not pleased that I had tried to use a gun to defend myself against it. He also claimed that the campground would be safe now, but never let my guard down. He was right. I never did. But after that, I never heard any strange noises again. But that doesn't mean they weren't there. I can't say for sure what this thing was, but I do know that it was dangerous and aggressive. I later found out that there had been other encounters with this thing near the campground. One happened with a camp counselor who was apparently attacked by one. He was never allowed to speak about it. There have been other reports, sure, but I'm not sure of the validity. My friend, who was a park ranger at this time in the campground, had about 15 years of experience, had multiple encounters with this thing. He claims it was the most aggressive and deadly thing he's ever come across. He also claimed it was very intelligent, even understanding human speech. He believes that this thing was deliberately trying to cause trouble. Whatever it was, trying to hurt people or just scare them, I'm not sure. But I do know that the entity we came across was very dangerous. I've probably already said too much, but I just wanted to share my story. I'm not the best writer, so I'm sorry if there might be some details that don't add up correctly. Feel free to ask me any questions. Be careful out there, and don't let your guard down. Oh, and I should add in this one last anecdote. You know how I said I was an atheist, right? Well, my disbelief in God does not deter my belief in spirits, the supernatural, and the experiences I can't refute.